Hi folks, I've got something a little bit different in this episode. I was part of a panel a few weeks ago. It was part of a series hosted by Roman Dial at the Anchorage Museum. Roman is Alaska's premier human-powered adventure guru, and the museum has been running a series of his photos in the main lobby. It's really impressive. And also this monthly panel, and the topics have ranged from science and adventure in the different mountain ranges. But this panel was about risk management. I was really excited to be part of it. So it's part of the Outdoor Adventure series. The title was When Things Go Wrong: Prevention, Response, and Recovery in the Great Outdoors. The recording of the live event was rough. The video was pretty bad. It cut out in at least one spot. And so I got a copy of that, and I boosted the levels as well as I could to make available here. Because there's a lot of value, this panel was just awesome. These are all people that I have learned from directly. Roman, of course, but also Deb Ayongo, a wilderness medicine expert. Her company is Safety Ed. Joe Stock from the Alaska Guide Collective, whose recent book on the avalanche factor was really well done, highly recommended. And we even pulled in Claire Dallett, a friend of Deb's from Australia. Claire has a PhD in accident prevention. She has a master's in risk management. Her company is Risk Resolve. It's like, I didn't even know these things were possible. So a ton of valuable insight here, and we tried to create an arc kind of through prevention, what you might expect if things do go wrong, and then Claire filled in some gaps as far as how to support somebody after an incident. So that's what we've got. I apologize that the audio is a little bit rough. That's just going to be part of the deal here. But I think it is good enough to convey the points. And so here it is.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for braving the snow to be here. Welcome to the Anchorage Museum, situated on the traditional homelands of the Dena'ina. My name is Alex Tate, and I'm the Associate Curator here. And we're so pleased to welcome you to the fourth installment in a series of outdoor adventure talks in conjunction with Roman Dial and his exhibition, which is now on view in the atrium. Tonight, Roman and friends will share When Things Go Wrong: Prevention, Response, and Recovery in the Great Outdoors. Very apt also, because tech issues, when things go wrong, see, it's all connected. It's all part of the show. Please join us over the next first Tuesdays, February through April, with alternating topics related to recreating in Alaska, all hosted by Roman. The next program will be on Tuesday, February 3rd, on the topic of Brooks Rangers, traversing the Brooks Range end to end. And you can find that on our museum calendar and also our social media channels. So before I hand it over to Roman, a few quick plugs for things happening and just some housekeeping. Please make sure your phones are silenced if you've not done so already. When you exit the museum, we will be closed, so please do exit outside the 7th Avenue entrance over there, not the main entrance. Those doors are armed and locked now. This program is also being live streamed on Crowdcast, thanks to all of you who are joining online. And that also serves as a spot to watch the recording of this. So if you loved it so much and want to share it with someone after the fact, you can go back through the calendar, find that link, and watch it after or share it. Finally, if you enjoy this program and would like to see more events like this, consider becoming a museum member. Memberships include unlimited admission, access to member-only events like behind-the-scenes tours, exhibition previews, and family programming. In addition, you directly support the museum's role in building a vibrant community. And for more information, you can find that on our website. Without further ado, here's Roman to introduce tonight's special guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks to all of you for coming tonight and braving those sketchy road conditions. Yeah, tonight it's about outdoor risk, and I have a panel of some of the most expert people on outdoor risk in the world, actually. I'm not really an expert on outdoor risk. These people are outdoor risk professionals, but we all share a love of the outdoors and the adventure you can have there. We've all got science degrees, and we've all written books that were sparked by a tragedy. I think Luke Mell, I think everybody here knows Luke Mell and his Packraft Handbook. Joe Stock, he's written the Avalanche Factor, and Deba Yango, who's written 2 books, both titled Lessons Learned, parts 1 and 2, I guess. And then we have Claire Dallett, I'm not sure how to point to you, here from Melbourne, Australia, which is amazing that she'd come here this way. And myself, you know, I wrote a book, maybe some of you read it, it's called The Adventurer's Son, and it was about risk and dealing with risk in all its different stages. And when I wrote that book, the book was about my son who went missing in the jungle in Costa Rica. And it took me a couple of years to find out what had happened to him. It was difficult. And I wrote the book to help myself understand what had happened and why it had happened. And I didn't really write it to make money. I didn't really write it to pound my chest and say, look at me. I wrote it by going to the end where we finally found out what had happened to him, and then working my way back to my birth to see if anywhere along the way I could see what role I played in his disappearance and his death. So it was really useful for me. I didn't quit doing outdoor activities. Maybe I embraced them even more. I don't really want to tell that story right now. I think I told you enough about it. But what I do want to tell you is what I actually learned and some of the real take-home messages that I got from that. And one thing I learned is that I'm wrong a lot. I'm often wrong. I think I know what's going on, but I don't. It's also true that that's how everybody is. All of us are wrong a lot. And what really matters is what you do with being wrong. That's the most important thing, is what do you do with that knowledge. The other thing I learned is that when things are really kind of stressful or desperate, it's good to try to take a breath and relax. I guess I'd known that for a long time. I've been in some sketchy situations in my past. If you were to go out and look on the walls in the atrium, you might see some photographs of some sketchy things I've done in the past, and a lot of them were stressful. I had to learn to be calm in those situations. The third thing, I think this is the most important lesson for me, is that related to all those dangerous activities that I did that you can see on the wall in the atrium, I love doing those things. I thought they helped me with personal growth. They challenged me. I discovered myself, as cliche as that sounds, but I didn't realize until I was looking for my son, and I was wondering, thinking, done the unthinkable, that maybe he is dead. I didn't really realize, and this sounds ridiculous, that I would be 53 years old before I finally knew this, that when we die, I'm not going to feel myself, I'm going to be dead. But the people who love me, they're the ones who are going to be hurt. And it's extremely selfish of me to have spent, 45 years of my life risking it when people who love me would be really destroyed or anguished if I were to die. And that's how I was shocked. That was the biggest lesson. You're like, wow, Roman, that's your biggest lesson? I already knew that. So I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it. And the last thing I thought that my wife Peggy and I talk a lot about is, if only Roman had had, someone along with him. Because bad luck happens all the time.
We have so many things that we want to share with you that we kind of tried to task ourselves with coming up with just like 2 or 3 things to help you that hopefully you can remember out of the whole spray of things we're going to get at you. So I'll start with one of mine, which feeds off of how Roman says he's wrong a lot. And the fact is that we make mistakes, and I read about this in an elegant way. I can't remember where I read it, so I can't give them credit, but it talked about how there's like the sly fox and the curious cat and the sluggish slug, and the human version of that is like to err is human. So it's like that's how fundamental those mistakes are to our lives, right? Like everybody here has made probably mistakes today. And so the game we're trying to play in being as prepared as possible for things going wrong outside, like that game has to include the fact that we're going to make mistakes. Like, we can practice perfect, we can train to perfection, but the reality is there's got to be room for mistakes. So that's one of the two things that I hope you can take home from my piece here. And then the other is an invitation to try to figure out how to make this part of the outdoor experience part of your reward. And this is a little bit harder for me to convey, but it's been pretty effective for me in the last years, where I'm trying to find ways to celebrate the good decisions and the good planning. And I think my wife Sarah sometimes gets tired of it, because we'll be out and be like, man, we made such good decisions today, and like, how cool is that? Whereas I feel like 10 years ago, it'd be like, we made it to the top of the mountain, or this or that. And that's working well for me. It's like replacing some of the other rewards, the ones that required higher exposure or more dangerous settings. And so part of what I'm going to do in this introduction is just try to like give you some of the mental framework that works for me, that helps me communicate and then helps me celebrate. And I know Joe's a big fan of this too, like celebrating when he turns around on a ski day. It's like, yes, I did such a good job. And maybe that looks like going to get pizza or beer or cookies or whatever it is. It can be like a physical reward, but I think that, at least for me, that's been an effective transition into getting better at anticipating what can go wrong. So before I paint the framework, or I can use Roman's help with this, I want to hear, you talked a little bit about it yesterday, the transition and how you perceived your outdoor time, specifically like Brooks Range trips, before and after, because you went back to the Brooks Range for 3-4 years with the science team. So in terms of risk tolerance, in terms of your willingness for things to go wrong.
Well, sure. I think, yeah, my mic's on. I think that's a good question. I'd have to say that it's difficult to separate sort of aging in general. I'm 65 now, and I was kind of an old man when I was looking for my son, and I can just tell over the arc of my life that when I was a little kid, I was sort of a nature kid. I liked to catch turtles and lizards and look for carnivorous plants and weird orchids. And then puberty hit. That wasn't that interesting anymore. And I got interested in girls, and also in kind of risky sports. I didn't think of them as risky. I found them to be exhilarating and exciting. Rock climbing, or skiing, or those were about the only things I did at the time, or hiking alone, for example. And then when I came to Alaska, those sort of risky sports kind of peaked. Being a climber in the Fairbanks scene, climbing mountains, waterfalls, got into whitewater rafting. Kind of lasted quite a long while, I think. And I'm looking forward to having Deb explain, how the brain works, but I kind of feel like the way my brain worked is if I scared it. I didn't really like being scared so much, but I liked the feeling I got after I'd been scared, It was like I don't like adrenaline, but I like whatever comes after the adrenaline, which is like, wow, I lived. That's a great feeling. I think that, I'm a biologist, I'm an evolutionary biologist, and I sort of feel like those hormones or drugs or whatever they are that are coming loose in our head, they've evolved to reward us when we made a good decision. It's like the evolution's way of saying, good job, Roman. But then you're like, wow, that feels really good. I'm going to do something else stupid. Wow, that feels good. I didn't die. And I was addicted to that. I think it is an addiction. But then I got slapped in the face when I saw that my son was missing and that maybe I'd somehow brought him there. Boy, we looked for him for a long time. We went down there every chance we got. My wife Peggy and I would go down and wander around in the jungle and calling his name and dodging snakes. It was risky just to look for him. I had friends come down to help. I didn't want him to be there because it was too risky, and they didn't know how to move through the jungle. I remember Todd Tumalo, just about stepped into this little, palm viper right at face level. And I was like, holy cow, why did I ask him to come help? But once we found him, I didn't stay away from the outdoors. I didn't think, oh, raising our kids in the outdoors was a bad idea. Why did I ever get into that? No, I didn't think that at all. The first thing I did was run off to the Brooks Range when I got back after found out what had happened to him, and somehow I find solace there. I don't know, maybe it's just a distraction. I don't know exactly why, but I do feel the need to go to wild places. I don't like to go alone. I like to go with somebody else. And now, so I kind of started as sort of a nature kid and was sort of kind of a risky daredevil, young adult and middle age, and then now I'm kind of an old man, and I feel like I'm back to being like a nature kid. But I do kind of hardcore. I've got another nature kid over here that I do this hardcore nature kid stuff with, where we, collect data and use computers and write papers. But it's sort of the same thing. And I like taking people out there with me as well. Sorry to go on so long.
I guess I still want to hear about what you said yesterday was how with the young science and art crews going into the Brooks Range, that you were more worried about things going wrong. Like you had a new responsibility.
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, it was terrifying. Like you're out with these 20-somethings and they're all out trying to they want that drug, Oh, it's a bear. Let's stick around. What do we do with the bear? Or, oh, river crossings. Oh my God, I want to go first. They're like, oh, give me some more. This feels good. And you have to be like, hey guys, no. What I'm thinking is of their parents back home. What I'm thinking is, what happens if one of these 20-something kids does get bit by a bear or drowns in a river or falls on a cliff and hits their head? All of a sudden, I have a lot more responsibility, not to those kids, but to their parents that I'd never really sort of thought about before.
Yeah, thanks. And the reason I wanted to include that is because the dangers haven't changed, right? It's not like the bears got more aggressive or the water got more swift. It's like Roman changed. Roman had an experience that changed him, that changed his willingness for things to go wrong. So this is one of the spaces I like to explore, this risk tolerance space, and part of that space requires assessing the risk in the first place. And arguably, probably nobody's better at assessing backcountry risk in the Brooks Range than Roman, and you were probably better at it. You're probably better at it now than you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But this risk tolerance changes for us. It'll be different for all of us if we're all going to ski the same slope. It's very personal, it's very subjective. And part of that is because the assessment part is hard. And so now I'm going to introduce a few different sort of mental models that might be helpful for you to think about the assessment and to at least host some conversations with your partners. Make sense? So one of the models is in terms of hazard and exposure. You can kind of take yourself out of this, which is helpful. So hazards are the things that can do harm. And there are a bunch of these that are environmental, act of God, a tree falling, high wind, cold temperatures, big snow. And then some of them are more human, like the dynamic that leads to bullying or harassment. But it's something that you can kind of distance yourself from. Like, here is something over here that can do harm. And then we're interested in what's exposed to that. And it can be helpful to think about exposure in a few different ways. One is in terms of time. So this time of year, I think about it a lot when I'm trying to ice skate or in the summer maybe paddle around icebergs or the front of calving glaciers. And in terms of exposure time, my game is to be really quick. We call it like a dash and grab. We go in as close as we're comfortable and we get the heck out there because we don't want to be exposed to that hazard for too long. Make sense? It's going to be helpful for me if I see like affirmation. Good, thanks. Even if you don't understand, just go ahead and nod. Sarah's really good at that. Okay, another way to think about exposure would be in degree. And so my example of this would be, at Kincaid, there are some raised pieces of lumber, and they're about a foot wide, and you can ride them on your bike, but they're only inches off the ground, so that degree of exposure is very small. Or maybe you think of a slack line if you're a slack liner. But then I see pictures of slack lines way up high over canyons, and I went biking in Whitehorse, and those same boards were up like 12 feet in the air. Same skill set, right? It takes the same exact skill to navigate that, but the degree of exposure is really different. So hazard and exposure, I am inviting you to just kind of bring those into your vocabulary and bring those into your conversations when you're driving, when you're out, if they're not already. Another framework is probability and consequence. So how likely is something to go wrong? And if it does, how big of a deal is it? And in this space, there's some really scary stuff. The work that Joe does that I'm most afraid of. What's the avalanche problem? What's your nightmare avalanche problem? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, that would be the deep slab.
How come?
Oh, because it's kind of like this sleeping dragon. They may not really know it's there. Like if I fly into the middle of nowhere, like in the Alaska range, it may just be there and I may not be aware of it. And then if it goes, if I release one of these deep slabs, it's going to be really big and really dangerous. Unsurvivable, pretty much.
So in that probability consequence space, it's a really low likelihood that you're going to trigger this thing. If it's deep, it's hard to even have the pressure ball to trigger that. But if it goes, it's a really big deal. That's terrifying, that's scary. But in this same probability consequence space, if you go into a zone that's where things are very likely to go wrong, but they aren't a very big deal, like learning to ski at Alyeska maybe, or Sarah and I like doing this whenever we can find thin ice that's over very shallow water so that we can afford to crack through the ice and get our feet wet. We learn a lot. This is a really nice environment to learn. When you know things are going to, well, you don't know, but it's really likely that things are going to go wrong, but it's just not that big of a deal. So I seek those out. I want those because I get to learn about thin ice, or I think in the snow world it would be trying to get something to slide on a very small little rollover. Is that something you do in your classes? You look for those environments?
Yeah, trying to start those little mini avalanches is about the best way I'm going to actually practice and see avalanches in action, because I'm not a ski patroller, I don't get to throw bombs, so jumping on those little slopes is the best way to see them. But unfortunately, I can't practice with those deep slabs because they're just like, they're too hard to trigger and they're too unpredictable, and if they go, the consequences are too high, so I just like got to avoid them, try to realize they're there and just back off.
Yeah, perfect. Does this feel like something you can remember without any? It's like Sarah, it's so hard for me not to have like visual cues behind me, and for you all. So I have that learning space, and I have that scary space, and when Deb talks in her brain, those fit more into danger and discomfort. It's the same idea in different words. Is that appropriate? And I'm trying to identify that before I go out, and when I'm out, it's like, is this an uncomfortable situation or is this a dangerous situation? And then I'm trying to have that conversation with my peers. And that assessment's going to change, and my risk tolerance is going to do this and that, and with like Romans, and it's going to drop down, has been dropping down as I get older. Part of that is that as I get older, I just have more data in my database about the things that can go wrong. Part of the game that we're going to try to play is to help, well, that we're still playing and can hopefully help you with, is how do we get better at identifying what can go wrong? It's easy to say that. What can go wrong today? It's really hard to know that if you're brand new to the activity. I had my best friend's kid who was probably 6 at the time, and I was trying to tell him how to talk risk to his kid, and he kind of went through the progression of there's a Band-Aid tier of risk, and there's a broken arm tier of risk, and he prompted the kid, what comes next? What's worse than a broken arm? The kid's like, I have no idea. Like, I can't even imagine anything worse than a broken arm, right? So with experience, we do know there is something worse than a broken arm. So I'll just give you my 2 bullet points again, and then I'll sort of outline what the rest of our time is going to look like, and then I'll pass on the mic. One bullet point was that we are going to make mistakes, and that's okay. Those mistakes are also our learning opportunities. So it's trying to plan so that the mistakes are made and we have the resources and the skills to recover, or that the consequences are small. So mistakes, and then this opportunity to sort of embrace the planning part and make that part of the fun, if you're willing, as you go out. What we're going to try to do in the rest of the session is a progression. Joe's going to focus on prevention. Like, maybe we're perfect and we don't make those mistakes. And then Deb's going to get real and say, we made some mistakes or there were acts of God, but in the moment. What do our brains do? What do we do? And then Claire is going to wrap things up with how to support ourselves and people that are involved in those incidents. So we're trying to go through a full arc here in the next hour.
Luke, before we move on to that, thanks for outlining that. My question is, what about the young people who are out there who, are sort of still in that hormone stage, if you will, or this emotional stage where that drives what they do rather than reason? And, I'm thinking of like really good skiers or, backcountry or alpine skiers, the ones who hug off of cliffs, or alpine climbers who climb big walls, in the Alaska range or the Karakoram. What do we say to those young people? It's hard to say, attaboy, go get him, that is so cool. You won the Pioleta Ore. I can't believe it. Congratulations, that's such a great thing. Would you stop climbing now? Because I don't want to see you die, because it hurts when I see people that I know and love die, and I don't want you to die. I can't say that to this kid, I love your framework, but I don't know, how could I translate your framework for him?
I don't know. And I don't know because we all were that kid that was pushing hard. And Joe and I were just talking about this the other day, and we're both just like, we are so glad that we have nothing left to prove. I don't know if those are probably my words, not yours, Joe, but like, we've done a bunch of really cool stuff, and it makes it so easy now to turn around. But without that bank of having done a bunch of cool stuff, those are the people I'm worried about. It's like, yeah, it's kind of nice to build up that bank. So I'm still trying to figure this out, because I don't want to be a hypocrite and say, don't do all these things that I did and that were hugely rewarding for me.
I know. I'm just a coward, and I don't say anything. I don't say, attaboy, and I don't say, stop it. And I wish I could come to a balance where I could say, I wish I could just say, God, I love what you're doing, but I love you more. Tone it down. There was a kid who died recently when he rappelled off of his rope and on a big wall. And before that had happened, he'd done this string of really amazing climbs. And he posted something on Instagram, and his dad wrote on Instagram, his dad said, and his dad was a climber too, or is a climber, and has had plenty of risk. And his dad actually said, if you do things that are half as stupid, you're going to live twice as long. I love you, son. Happy birthday, Dad. I kind of feel like when you tell somebody that, they're going to push back. They're going to be like, Dad, you did that. I'm going to do it too, and it feels so good to do it. And maybe what your answer is correct. We don't know what to do. Maybe there's nothing that we could do. Maybe it's just part of the human condition, and we just have to hold our breath and hope that they make it to be in their 40s and 50s and 60s and have kids of their own and can come to deal with that dilemma themselves. Maybe there really is nothing we can do, or nothing correct to say, because everything we say is going to not be what is an easy answer.
I think let's keep with our
intended arc here, but then Claire, maybe this is something that you could fit into yours. Claire works with youth programs more than the rest of us, and so maybe we'll just push all the hard questions on you at the end, if you are willing. Okay, so do you guys have anything to add before Joe does some prevention stuff?
So just one thing I will mention, Roman, when I talk, because that was one thing I was thinking of, is we talked last night about, well, what are some key points? What are things we can say? And so I do have something of, what can the old folks teach the young folks, right? It's not a magic wand, but there are a couple ideas of how can we help the younger generation. So I'll throw that out once my turn.
Okay, good.
All right, I guess I'm going to talk about prevention here for a little bit. So yeah, my career, I feel like as a mountain guide, it's like about avoiding accidents. I just want to do absolutely everything I can do to avoid accidents, because they're bad, and I've been involved with a handful of them, and they're horrible experiences, and so it's like everything I'm doing is trying to avoid those. So I feel like once the accident happens, I'm kind of back to being a novice. So like I'm doing all my training, and I've taken all the courses, and then do meticulous planning. Those are all like basics for avoiding avalanches, avoiding accidents. Is that the courses, the training, and the planning, and those like guides have all done those extensively, and I feel like that's I thrive in that. Trying to figure out and understand the mountains, and trying to figure out how to move through them safely and to be in these really risky situations, but not have an accident. But kind of narrowing it down to like some of my favorite ways to avoid accidents and to minimize risk, and we've already touched on these some. Like the three I'd say would be like turning around, preparing for the worst, and having this 100-year mindset. This first one, turning around, I've been really fascinated by turning around for quite a few years now. Especially, I think it was like 15 years ago, I realized, I was on this series, like one spring up here, it was like conditions were really good, and I was just like skiing all this incredible stuff, and just like, success after success after success of, success being like I skied this monster face, and it was great, and had a blast, and everything worked out great, and I was like, oh boy, this is going to catch up to me. This luck is going to run out. So I started realizing I just switched my mindset to the success not being skiing off the summit with a buddy, but the success would be something more difficult. The more difficult thing would be to turn around. Because skiing off the summit, off a steep big face in the Chugach or something like that, that's not hard at all. That's just like so much fun. It's like, maybe just thrive on that. So it's not hard at all. It's just like, that's like the most fun I could ever have. So switch it around to something that really is hard, and that's turning around. So I started, trying to turn around more, and started practicing it. And that's what I think you have to practice turning around and exercise that turning around muscle. So you're really quick to turn around when they need be. It's just like, these clients that I ski with every spring that know me, they're used to seeing me like skimming up a slope and then suddenly turning around and saying, okay, we're going back down. And they're just like, they know I do that. It's just like, that's just how I operate. I didn't like the feeling on that slope. We're just going to go off and go ski something else. So if you're able to turn around, that means you can always go for it. You can always try, but because you always have this special tool in your back pocket of turning around. And it's, I saw this book, like one of our favorite authors, Annie Duke. She's a former professional poker player, psychologist, but it's written these great books. And one of her recent ones is called Quit, which is basically turning around. And realized one way I quit recently was like quit guiding the Matterhorn. I've been probably guiding the Matterhorn for like 10 years. It's like, the most iconic mountain in the world, this like crumbling thorn in Switzerland there. And, it's a great physical challenge. And it's just interesting and different. There's nothing like it in the US. It's 4,000 feet up of crumbling rock, and then you got to get down, which is even harder. But it always kind of creeped me out. And a couple of years ago, I had 3 trips there. The first trip went great, had a great client, and we went up and down, had a blast. The second trip, when we were on it, 3 people fell off the north face, and it's just like, that just is normal. They fell off and they're, dead. It's just normal. And then the third trip, there it was like, we're going up there and I passed a guide, a Canadian guide I knew, and he almost got flossed off by 2 people falling. The rope between them almost pulled him off. And that night, I'm at the hut with my client and the hut warden. She's walking around and she's like trying to find a replacement guide, because that guide that got killed was supposed to guide it again the next day. And it's just like, well, the client still wants to climb, guide's dead, so they need to find another guide. So she was walking around asking other people, and it was like, okay, as much as I love this thing, the Matterhorn, I gotta I'm gonna quit. I'm gonna stop doing it while I'm ahead. So that's like kind of a good risk management strategy. Another one is preparing for the worst. I think, kind of a close to home mindset, just even like going up into the mountains right here above town. You start skiing back Powerline Pass or any valley of Turningen Pass, and you're really isolated really quickly. And what happens if somebody busts a leg back there? Are you ready to deal with that? And be thinking about that. Okay, do you have shelter in your backpack? Because you gotta have shelter. A lot of these valleys have sticks in them. Do you know how to build a fire? Have you practiced building a fire? Do you have an extra puffy coat? Do you have a way to communicate with the outside? So you're thinking this worst case scenario. And there's another book that another favorite author of Luke and I, this guy Nassim Taleb, and one of his books is Anti-Fragile. Has anybody read that or looked at it, Anti-Fragile? He's kind of like an economics, kind of risk management guy, but I find his books kind of hard to read, so I kind of go to the nuggets. I think Luke's read them cover to cover.
He's not even returning on. He's so arrogant, I can do it.
He's very arrogant, yeah, but he has some good points in there. And this concept of being anti-fragile, it's like being able to be ready for these things to go wrong, and when they go wrong, you actually thrive in that environment. So you're so prepared that when you hit this roadblock, and then it's just like you keep on going, but you're stronger. Like we were talking about the deep slab avalanche. For example, like the deep slab avalanche, if you're caught in a deep slab avalanche, they're so big that you're probably dead. But let's say if you prepared enough that you're out there and there's lingering deep slabs, but you're, let's say, on the ridge, and you trigger the avalanche, the deep slab, and it rips out below you, and then, well, this monstrous, deadly thing just happened, but you're in a safe place, and you get to see this big avalanche, and you get to learn, and you get to become better as a result. So I really like that the idea of being anti-fragile. It's kind of like the black swan. Maybe you've heard of the black swan. Taleb wrote The Black Swan. These like really big kind of catastrophic events that are hard to plan for. Those are black swan events. And so kind of, because you can't predict them, but you can prepare for them. Another way to deal with those, preparing for the worst, is this the pre-mortem, which is a common technique used in business, which works great in the mountains, and it's going strong for use in the mountains, especially like making decisions in avalanche terrain. You're standing at the top of a slope, and it's like, are we going to ski this thing or not? And it's like, well, let's consider all the things that could go wrong here. Let's try to think of like the worst case scenario. Who's the guy that wrote the articles about people when they got caught in avalanches? Is it Nedry?
Craigslist.
What's that?
Oh, Craigslist, that was Craig Medred.
Craig Medred, yeah.
Yeah,
So
he
it's
never
actually
wanted
like,
to be a front page story.
yeah. So if you had actually, Craig was going to write about you on the front page of the Anchorage Daily News, what's he going to say about you? So you try to imagine the headlines there and what a dumbass he was and all these things he did and everything. Try to think of those ahead of time, and it kind of opens up the discussion. So you're preparing for the worst, and it's like, oh, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe let's go to this lower angle slope. Another one that we were, the third point I had there was this 100-year mindset, and we've already talked about this a couple minutes ago, but this is, instead of being the goals, having goals for the season, have like goals for living 100 years, because if you're alive for 100 years or even 80 or 70 or whatever, you're going to get a lot more great times in the backcountry than if you're dead. So it's just like, go for quantity, and if you get more quantity, then you get more quality. So it's just like back off a little bit. Just take it a little bit more easy. Think about the long haul. Kind of think about the legendary skier around here just passed away a couple years ago, Poacher Dave. He was just like, the guy would ski backcountry ski 150 days a year for his whole life. And he just loved it, and he had so many great experiences out there. Every time I saw him, he'd flip through the photos showing his great powder, and a lot of those days I'm sure weren't that great, but he did ski a lot. And I kind of think, we were talking about this, surviving for the long haul, and what do you say to the young people so they can kind of think long term, because that concept was just like so beyond my comprehension when I was younger. I wanted everything like right away. I had to do it right away, because life revolved around like, okay, I wanted to climb this peak and I had to do it. If I didn't do it, life was going to be over. And it's kind of, my parents kind of thought that way also. They were kind of obsessive scientists and liked to do a lot of things, so I just thought that way. But then I remember in college, I had a couple accidents, and this was in New Zealand, and then I was talking to the department head in the Department of Geology there about something else, and then he kind of started scolding me. He was like, what you're doing is really dangerous. People care about you, and you just got to back off. And that was the first time anybody ever told that to me. And it was kind of shocking, and it really stuck with me. And it was like, so I think it is, if you can tell the youth that, like you're saying, that people do care about you, and there's this thing besides yourself out there. So, so those are my main 3 points: the turning around, preparing for the worst, and having this 100-year mindset. But, Luke and Roman, well, Luke, you've been traipsing around Alaska a lot. What are your favorite ways to avoid accidents?
I think for these tools, and I am kind of trying to think of it as a toolbox, like what wrench can I grab to help me make a decision? And my 2 favorite ones are on your list already. It's that the turning around. I've been thinking about it as a kill switch, like on the snow machine or on the treadmill or something. There's this clip that you can attach to yourself, so that I lost on the snow machine. I was driving a snow machine, and it was a big powder day, and somehow that powder jammed the throttle open, and so I tipped over, and the snow machine just kept going. And it was a whiteout, and I was on a glacier. I was in college, and we followed that machine, and it got air, and it took a nice corner, and then it launched, and it smashed into a wall of ice in a meltwater channel and fell to the bottom. And so that's I've got a really good mental lesson on the value of that kill switch. If I've been wearing the damn thing, how many people have seen those kill switches on something in life, right? How many people have used them? You used one, awesome. Okay, you get a prize. We're going to give you a book afterwards. We don't actually have a book, but I can give you one of Deb's books later. I have a little landing library of Deb's book. So the kill switch, and then I really like that pre-mortem one as well, just sort of playing a little bit of a time machine game, going to the end and imagining things didn't work out, and then trying to unravel backwards. Why didn't they work out?
Yeah, that's great. Deb, you spent a lot of time on Denali. So what's your, maybe some of your favorite mindsets for ways of avoiding accidents up there on Denali?
Well, I'll probably just wait, because I do have a couple points, but mine are gonna be in when I talk, so I'll just hold off for now, okay?
Okay, sounds good. We have enough time. Roman, you got any favorite ways? Favorite ways you like to avoid accidents?
Yeah, I like to look at everybody else's face, who's with me, and see how they look. And if they're nervous and scared, then I'm like, maybe we don't do this. When I was younger, if I look at their face, Peggy's face, I've looked at her face many times, and sometimes she looked nervous and scared, and I tried to talk her into it anyway. But as I've aged, and as I've had to take on responsibilities of other people, I've tried to be aware of what they're feeling, because it's as much their experience as mine. So I look at them, and because they often won't say it. They won't say it. They won't say, oh, I'm afraid, or I don't want to do this. They might show it. So I try to be aware of that. And then I'm not afraid of being the guy who says, let's go back, or let's turn out. I don't mind being that person. Because it's not always easy to say when you do have like a goal, even if the goal is just how far you're going to go that day. And if you got to cross one more river to get there, I think you got to be able to say, nope, this is enough. And you can often not have to try to convince everybody if you can see that somebody's worried, because other people will feel that too.
One thing I'll throw with that, Rob, Roman, we talked about this a little last night, is that this was a research project somebody had done a long time ago. I think it was a dissertation, but they had looked at outdoor fear. So it could be all of you. I don't remember how many people were in the research project, but we would ask, like, what are you most afraid of out there, right? Bears, snakes, whatever, depends if you're in Australia or not. And the number one noted fear with adults was the fear of looking stupid in front of your peers. And that always stuck with me, right? And that really addresses totally what you just said. They don't want to look stupid. They don't be like, oh, yeah, I'm okay with this. If you're okay with this, I'm okay with this, or whatever, right? But if we don't want to look stupid, it's like one of the things, and again, I'm going to get to the data here, but it's like, I never tell somebody, hey, you know how to use a sat phone, right? Wrong way to phrase that. Hey, it's really important that we all know how to use this sat phone. Here's how we use it. This is a good review, right? So you can't go with the assumption of, hey, you know this, right? Because they're, oh, yeah. I mean, some people will say, hey, I don't know how to use that. A lot of people are like, yeah, sure, you bet. And that's what I'm going to get into is, ooh, when the copy hits the fan, you're going to want to have your, things that grow here. So you don't want to go in with that. Yeah, I think it'll be okay. So anyways, just throw that out. So, time for me to move on?
I think, well,
Oh, yeah.
we're right on time for you, but Claire, maybe, can you take a stab at Joe's prompt as well, like as far as these, like a top prevention trick?
Yeah, I like that question. I think for me, there's probably 2 or 3 things that stands out, and it's really in line with what has already been said, but I like to call it the non-negotiables. Like, what are the non-negotiables of us operating as a team, whether that's a team of 2 or whether that's a team of 10, which includes, 8 young people, for example, depending on the social context. And I think, to completely agree with Deb on that, how our social status as individuals, whether we're a 12-year-old or a 55-year-old, and whatever role we're in, it is a key contributor to how we see things, how we make decisions, whether we agree, whether we inside disagree, but our face shows that sure it's neutral, that we'll follow along. So I think understanding that either as if we're in a leadership role or in a partnership, we're just going out with 2 folks. I think the other thing that, some of the things I've seen done really well there, rather than just assuming folks will speak up, having an envelope and passing around on the envelope, how comfortable do we feel today on a scale of 1 to 10? What went well today around how we made decisions, and what am I concerned about, or what's keeping me up? And so that it takes away, it gives that sort of ability to be, in some ways, anonymous, but to be directly honest about how we feel. Because we know that many incidents and that sort of trajectory of incidents, the human aspect, the social pressures, etc., how groups interact is a significant contributing factor to that.
Great, thanks. So I'll pick up now. So I'm going to talk, rather than more of a chat, that I'm going to give you a little bit of, almost like a little lecture about the brain, right? So, but before I get to that, I want to confirm that this, to me, it's interesting listening to this, because we just got together last night and went through this. But even now, just listening to some new stuff coming up, it's impressive to me how much repetition I'm hearing with our stories. Right, so a bunch of old people who've done a lot, we have a lot of the same things to say, which I'm going to start adding to. Is so with Roman, he said he was surprised when his son died that so that happened, but then what happened to you in the field in Brooks Range was just that fear of talking to a parent, and it hadn't occurred to you how much death isn't really about you, but it's about the people behind, right? And the reason I'm bringing it up is, boy, this is totally my take on it, right? Like this doesn't make you dumb, Roman. This makes you a human. Like it is theoretical that people could die. That is all that is. We all know it could happen, but it takes a real event. Like, and that's what happened to me. It's like, holy cow! I had no idea that's what it was like. And I have always said since that point, if I could take a magic wand and I could touch you, and I could take my emotions and put it into you, you would change the dispenser, right? Like this is an incredibly central event for all of us. And so my first central event, and I've had many, you would know, time in the years in the field, is I was involved in the Ptarmigan Peak accident, right? So if you've been around a long time, you know Ptarmigan Peak. I had been a field practitioner, a guide, an educator. I had put in about 2,000 field days, which is a lot of field time, and I basically got to your point. And I thought, sooner or later a bad thing's gonna happen. I should probably not be on the cutting edge. So I decided to back off and become a director. So I thought, I'm gonna take on a new challenge, and I applied and was hired to run the University of Alaska outdoor program. And I think I got hired at the end of May, we started June 5th, something like that. And on June 29th, we had the Ptarmigan Peak climbing accident. I was not in the field, I wasn't on the mountain, but I was in charge. 2 students died. Every single person was involved, right? There were 14 people total, 12 students, two teachers, and it changed my life, right? Like this was devastating. It was devastating for the community, for me, for the program. It took me a couple of years to get off my feet and to go, holy cow. And I had to reevaluate whether or not I even wanted to go back outdoors. And now we can talk later about this concept on biological evolution of biophilia. So biophilia is the evolutionary belief that we're made to live in nature. And there's certain things about it with chemistry and everything else is that once you become familiar with that and you go into nature, like we haven't really had cities for more than a couple hundred years, you guys, right? They've been around a long time. We were made to live in nature. And it's very, very healing for us, right? So that's what it took me to go back out. And so I started going out with a very different mindset. And because I really enjoy the brain, I've learned about the brain, I tried to figure out, why do smart people make mistakes? I mean, why do people with masters and PhDs make just as many mistakes as people who never went to school, right? Because we all make mistakes. We're all human beings. And when you turn up the heat, the mistakes happen more readily, right? So like that's what I end up studying. So this is what I'm going to throw out to you guys, a little bit about the brain. So the brain, let's start with an analogy. Think avocado, okay? Always watching, she'll vomit. So the avocado, it's got a pit, right? And then it's got the meat to it. The pit, we're going to say, is your limbic system. So your brain is going to have a pit, and it's going to have the outside. The limbic system, or the pit of the brain, is all automated. And it actually goes all the way out of the avocado and all the way down to the cord. And that's just the automation part of the brain, right? It's fully based on data collection. All of your brain works on data collection. But this data collection starts in vitro, but inside mom, right? And so You've got all sorts of data receptors all around you, touch receptors, heat receptors, chemical receptors, and you're always figuring out, am I in an upright position? Am I safe? Am I too hot? Am I too cold? And then we just compensate, right? So the limbic system is this happens, then this happens, okay? And it's just basically keeping the system alive. It's basically like your heart beats at a certain rate, you breathe at a certain rate. When you exercise, you're going to be on carbon dioxide in the blood. You have to breathe harder to get rid of it. This is all happening without the prefrontal cortex thinking about it, right? So that's the inside of the brain. That's how that works. It's going to come back to haunt us in an emergency. That's why I bring it up. The outside of the brain, and that's not a learning machine. The limbic system can't learn a lot. Okay? It can't think forward. This thing can. This is also a computer, totally based on data recognition. But the problem with a human being is that we don't have very good data as youth, right? It takes age and all of the experiences we're talking about, every single thing I've heard you say, data collection has to do with living, right? Problem solving. And you collect data for most of human beings around the first 18 to 20 years, and now you've got enough data that you can actually go out and do it on your own. But we have to have like parents and mentors and stuff, because youth are so apt to making mistakes and getting killed, right? So we've got a couple things that are helping us out here. Within the limbic system, we have this thing called an amygdala, right? So the limbic system can kind of work by itself, the prefrontal cortex can kind of work by itself, but they work together all the time, and especially in an emergency. So the amygdala is a warning center. It's very much, if you're old enough, you remember the old Star Treks, Captain Kirk and Chekhov, right? Brown Bridge, and Chekhov says, hey, Captain, the screens came on. There must be something out there, right? So if you watch Star Trek, you understand what this means. So you've got detectors on the outside of the ship, and they must have detected something in the waves or something, right? They didn't realize there's something out there. So the shields came up to protect the ship before we even knew what was going on. The amygdala, when I learned about the amygdala, I'm like, oh, that's because the screens on the Enterprise. The same thing happens to us. Right? So if anybody's been in my classes, you'll know what comes next. So when I say, and just that's all it takes. So the limbic system is all about data recognition and pattern recognition. And anything that is outside of the pattern will alert you. If it's different, if it's unique, if it's novel, it's going to stimulate that part of the brain to alert the prefrontal cortex to pay attention to this. Okay? And now, a little bit of amygdala stimulation is good. It's adrenaline. We like that feeling, right? Too much of that is going to change everything. So it's like, boom, this amygdala hits, chemicals go into your system. It helps us pay attention. Our pupils actually dilate. We bring in more data. We have more ability to coagulate momentarily, so that if I get attacked, I clot more quickly. I divert blood from my tummy. We don't want to be digesting food right now. Let's move that blood to the muscles in case I need to fight or flight with, fight or flight. So all of these things are part of that amygdala response, okay? So that helps us through life. It says, hey, heads up, beware of this. And we look over there, and then the prefrontal cortex, through history, through time and learning, figures out if this is a threat or an opportunity, right? So an example might be a dog. A child doesn't know if a dog's a threat or an opportunity. A child doesn't know what a dog is. If you've never seen a dog in your life, you don't know what a dog is, right? You bring some wallaby in, we don't know what that is. Is that going to kill me? Is that going to hurt me? You have to have somebody teach you this, okay? The amygdala, if that dog goes and growls and the hair goes up, we don't have to have anybody teach us. The amygdala will stimulate in the child. You don't have to ever have seen that animal go, ooh, okay. So we have these automated things that help us understand danger. But this is really what requires, that's going to do the interpretation. The limbic system alerts us, and then this says, what is that, boss? What are we supposed to do here? So here's an example of what happens in an emergency. It's basically going to be all about what kind of menu to have for the prefrontal cortex, right? This is an emergency. You capsize, you fell out of the raft, you fell into a crevasse, you're in the avalanche, or you're being attacked by a bear. The amygdala is going to alert you to this. And it happens like in 0.01 seconds, the screens come up, then the data goes to prefrontal cortex for interpretation. So that takes 0.04 seconds. So the screens are already up, and now I'm figuring out what should we do with this, okay? Here's the case study that I'm going to ask you to consider. So real case study, long time ago, my former husband and I are walking around Albert Loop out by Eagle River Nature Center, and we hear something over here at about, this is old-fashioned clock, that's noon, 2 o'clock, a brown bear stands up, okay? Really used to brown bears, really used to seeing bears. The amygdala stimulates, but this is normal stimulation, normal adrenaline, okay? Hey, heads up, that's a bear. So it's like, okay, what do we do? Prefrontal cortex, tell me what to do. So now I say to everybody in the audience or anybody listening, is, boy, you better have a checklist of what you're supposed to do when you see a bear, right? You need to know what to do. If you don't, so it's going to say, what should we do, boss? And if the brain's like, what's that? If it's a Martian that came down, if it's something you're unfamiliar with, it doesn't know what to do. So then the amygdala goes, that's not the answer I wanted, right? So it's going to keep dumping that adrenaline into you. So let's go back to the bear story. Bear stands up, not a ton of adrenaline. We perform well. Hey, bear, we're human beings. We stand next to each other, clap our hands. We did what you're supposed to. And the bear did what he was supposed to, because he's just collecting data too. He wants to know, are we a threat or an opportunity? It actually stood up, and then it's like lifts its nose. It's trying to gather olfactory data, and it decided it didn't like us, right? We must have smelled bad. So it drops on all fours and it runs that way, and it barked. It was stressed. A stressed bear, it barked just like a dog. First bark, and the second bark, whoa! And I say, that was seared into my memory. So when that bark happened, on this side of the trail, it was an explosion. And it was a Mack truck driving a 65. And it's and the prefrontal cortex is like, what the heck? And it's like, oh my goodness, that's a subadult. And it just yelled for mom, right? So mom bursts out on the trail, and she is coming straight at us. And her ears are pinned to her head, and her hair is straight up on end, and her lips are pulled fully back, and she is frowning at the mouth, and she is making, and I still remember it quite clearly, a deep guttural clicking sound as she is running straight at us. And now I say, okay, what are you gonna do, right? So now your prefrontal cortex has to come up with a quick decision. So you type it all in, brown bear, ears back, hair up, frowning, Google search, still searching, right? And that's the problem. And so this guy named John Leach, you guys study him, he's a good one for you, survival psychology, and he's done a lot of research on how do people perform in emergencies. Well, why does it not work, right? And what he found is that, so this is a relatively untrained person, because that's what I'm going to get into, is what you do is hone your training, right? A relatively untrained person who deals with a capsize, an avalanche, a bear attack, who we extrapolate, because we say, Claire and I basically try to steal from every industry out there, from pilots, the engines are out, from a surgeon who clips an artery and it's spurting. Like, you gotta act quick, right? Bell curve without the training, we said it's really a bell curve. And he studied tens of thousands of people. Bell curve. At the far end, at the right, those people nail it. We're like, yeah, no problem. So about 15% of people perform very, very well with mental training. At this end, about 15% of people do what's considered a panicked behavior. It actually makes it worse. Most people do not panic. The panic behavior makes things substantially worse. Usually that involves entrapment. Been trapped in a fire, in an avalanche probably, a burning building, something like that. So when you feel trapped, you're more likely to panic. But the big bulk of the bell curve because you're bewildered, right? So the leech called it the bewildered state. This bear is coming and you don't know what to do because you haven't played it through. You don't have the answers, right? And what they have found is, boy, you gotta have answers, right? And it's data sets. The longer you live, the more classes you take, the more high learning opportunities you get, the more you will build your data set. This is what quality response looks like with a capsize, with an avalanche, with a bear attack. We want to make sure you know this is what it's going to feel like, this is what it's going to look like, and with that type of training, Leach and now, because Leach started in like the 40s and 50s, they've really modified like your trainings so that teaching matters. How you teach this stuff matters. And then I've got a couple last things, and then I'll turn it over to Claire. So a couple things to think about is, so when I say the teaching matters, you want to help, so this could be for you, this could be for our youth. We want to make sure that they have a good idea of, again, give them good Google hits, realistic Google hits, okay? When we teach to people, if you're going to try to become a good teacher, I'm going to start with like the least effective teaching to the most effective teaching, especially under pressure. The least effective is lecture, right? It's just not, it does not develop long-term retention, and it's not effective at a Google hit in pressure, right? When you're under a highly pressurized situation, that is not going to rise to the top of the list, okay? So a straight, boring lecture just doesn't work. You talked about this a little bit, you guys both talked about it a little bit last night. Teaching requires almost like the Goldilocks. You want it just right. If it's too boring, we don't retain well. If it's too intense and too stressful, we don't retain well. So we talked about some, like a scenario. If you're going to build this avalanche scenario, you got to build, you want it to be just right, right? So you want them, when you're learning something, it needs to be engaging, you need to engage the brain, they got to stay awake. Generally speaking, the more noise you can use, the more moving around you can use. Visual learning actually works quite well, okay? So here's where a couple things. Visual learning is awesome. Really, really accurate visual learning. And now I predict in the next 10 years with, I was going to put my helmet on, with some of your artificial intelligence and simulations, they're going to do really cool simulated learning, right? You can put a helmet on, and that helmet has a bear charging you. And then you use bear spray and get it down, right? You'll be able to use artificial intelligence to do things like capsizing and having the right paddles, all of these things. Because it's like, you really have to put people at the cutting edge without harming them. Find things like you said, find little bitty ice that if you fall through, it's a foot. The consequences are so slow. Find that avalanche of contained, that low term consequences, but you still get to see it, right? Because if we don't have that data set, the brain's not going to know how this plays out. We do not do well with surprises in emergencies either, right? Then that's just going to keep dumping all the chemicals in the amygdala. Okay, so my final points, if I can find it here. So, and this, you guys already kind of mentioned this, but improve hazard awareness. A lot of times, especially beginners, these are the kids, like they don't know what hazards are, right? Like they don't realize that when it gets really, really windy, like the wind can blow your tent apart, you know? Like, what would you do? And they're like, well, that doesn't really happen, does it? Sure it does, right? And you have to, like, that's where the elders, like, we can walk them through these things. Like, play this out. What if this happens? What if that happens? Have them think this through. Visualization, extremely good visualization can actually build neural pathways almost as good as experiencing it. And that's what those athletes, those pro athletes do. Like when they're doing the luge runs or the ski runs in their head, they're visualizing it so accurately that they're building neural pathways for memory, okay? We can do the same thing, you guys, but we have to help the youth, like walk them through what might happen on your walk in, what might happen at camp, what might happen if the tent, all of these things, like walk them through it, find data that can work for them. And be careful, because you can also learn bad habits. And actually that's something I want to throw out, and I know we're coming close to time here, but what research shows is you will do your habit in an emergency, okay? So the key take-home point is build good habits, right? So I'm going to throw this one out. So Claire, I'm going to hold you for just a sec. So really good habit, you know this one, but this is a police officer. You got, I think, Pink Panther and Kato, right? So if you guys remember the old movie, Kato would jump out and attack you, the freedom to attack the Pink Panther, Clouseau. And so basically, this police officer was going through a multi-week training. And as part of the Clouseau thing, they were just joking and they would basically pull weapons on each other, right? And so I could jump you anytime. And what you would do in response is you would disarm me. And you got really, really good at pulling that weapon, right? And it didn't matter when I pulled it on you, how I did it, you could disarm me in a nanosecond, and your habit was then to give it back to me, okay? And he got really, really good at this. And can you believe he's the one officer that actually had to use this skill, right? And this is in a book, right? Because there's a really good example. And this police officer, undercover, we walk up to a convenience store, this guy pulls out a gun, and without hesitation, man, that cop took it and gave it right back. Right? And that's a great example. Like, build good habits, you guys. Know where your headlamp is in your tent, right? You don't want to look for it. Know how to start a stove. Know how to clean a stove. Know how to use your inlink. Those are all really important habits. Because when the cocky hits the fan, you're going to be with these people for a while, which kind of goes back to what you had said is, all right, so now you've got out of the water, you've got this injury, now what? Well, ask the boy, you're going to have these people for a while. I mean, you're going to be with them for an hour, 2, 3, 6. Take a chill pill, right? Take a chill pill, breathe, breathing techniques. Humor actually helps quite a bit. You need to know how to build a shelter. You need to know how to start a stove, heat source, all of those things. So those things, and if we can reduce that so it's not stressful to build a shelter, because I don't really know how, that's going to add to the stress. So it's like, the more you can be prepared for these things, the more you can think through them and visualize them, or we can storytell very, very well. If it's a really good story, we can help them visualize. And so those are some techniques that perhaps we can use ourselves, or also when we're trying to teach others. So I know again it's a little long, but I'm gonna wrap it up because Claire's got some stuff to contribute to. Thanks, Claire, sorry.
Oh, thanks, Deb. I could listen to you all day. So it's all good. Lovely to be with you all. I think there's a couple of things that are really different about me sitting here in Melbourne, Australia. Firstly, it's Wednesday. I can tell you that Wednesday is going to be a good one for you so far. It's also 106 Fahrenheit. I just did the switch from Celsius, so it's 43, 42 Celsius here right now for us, which I'm glad I'm inside and it's got air conditioning. But it really does it's interesting hearing about the glacial environment and the avalanche environment with absolutely baking outside. So that does mess the brain up a little bit. But look, it's lovely to be with you, and in some ways I feel sitting amongst, virtually at least sitting amongst this very esteemed crowd that I'm able to look at. And many of you, both in the room and online, what sort of brings me to this pack. And in many ways, I've known Deb for many years. I've met Luke a number of years ago now. I'm a big fan of his work, and also, just increasingly really, just really honored to be with Joe and Roman in this group. For me, how I got into this work, really briefly, I grew up, my accent is not Australian, as you can tell. It's a bit of a hybrid, it's Irish. I grew up in Northern Ireland. Back in the 70s during the Troubles, and the Troubles were when the Catholics and Protestants didn't get on with each other, so they tried to get kids to go off and do things in the outdoors that made us like each other. And that was really how I got into the outdoors. I was put in a canoe and told to paddle down the longest river in Ireland, sitting with a Protestant girl beside her in front of me in the canoe. And I think, what I really learned from those experiences was the power of the outdoors and outdoor experiences, whether they were in Alaska or, the south of Ireland, for example, or all over the world. And I decided there and then that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in the outdoors. And I was 18, I took myself off to the US on a gap year. It turned into a few years. And I experienced, as a young practitioner working in outdoor education, in upstate New York. I was 22 and I experienced fatality. And I can remember getting a call over the radio to go out and help. I just got my wilderness EMT, so I was pretty, I thought I'm ready for this, I know what I'm doing. And it was a tragic drowning, and I can remember spending the next number of hours in the water. And I think that day, very similar to, the previous, the panel, that day changed everything for me. As a 22-year-old, I clearly remember going, I'm either going to go make coffee for a living, as far away from this outdoor thing as possible, or I'm going to get curious and I'm going to stay in, but I'm going to stay in and I'll be different. And that's what I did. I chose the latter. And just like Deb, I got very interested in what other sectors could teach us, and primarily for me it was around healthcare, aviation. I became fascinated by all of that. And I ended up down here in Australia working at a large organisation that took about 30,000 young people a year into the Australian bush, and I was the risk and safety manager. And so I went off sort of the academic route as well as the practitioner route. So that's sort of where we're at, where sort of I come to from this is I have a PhD in accident prediction and a master's in risk and crisis management. And that's helpful, but actually what's even more helpful is putting them both together, the practice, the understanding what it's like to be cold, wet, tired, and hungry, the understanding what it's like when the social fabric of a group breaks down or when it works really well. And so, that got me, I suppose, my experience, in serious and fatal incidents really got me to really think about and see what do we need to do to look after our own? How do we care for those people directly involved and directly involved, as well as the practitioners, as well as the co-instructor, as well as the other leader, as well as the CEO, maybe if it's an organizational trip, or as well as the buddy who went along on the trip. And so that's what I suppose I'll hopefully, there might be some things here that are curious for yourselves, and I'd invite you to take what works. But when I think about the aftermath of serious and fatal incidents, there are always multiple victims, always. There are those folks who are directly involved, and the primary, the research, I'll take a bit of a research on, we talk about Doug, the primary victims, those people directly involved in their loved ones. And then we have our second victims. Those are those folks who, again, through the nature of their work or through the nature of the trip or the experience, and whether it's professional or volunteer, become impacted or adversely impacted by the incident. So that could be a ski patroller, that could be, the bus driver, it could be the CEO, it could be the co-instructor. And so when we think about what we know helps, we know that for the primary victims, those folks directly involved in their loved ones, we know that how incidents are managed and supported at the time and following can have a significant influence in terms of the long-term outcomes, both in the recovery of those people directly involved and their families, and also if it's an organization or if it's a club or a volunteer or a ski hill, also on the long-term outcomes of those organizations. For example, there's some research to show that taking care of people, genuinely taking care of people involved, being human, being present, can also lead to diminished legal outcomes because people feel they've been cared for. There's a great story, I think Gladwell talks about it in one of his books, the difference between a doctor who gets sued and a doctor who doesn't get sued, 3 minutes. The doctor who doesn't get sued spends on average 3 minutes longer with their patients. A very brief way to say that relationships really matter, and they matter critically after a serious and fatal incident. Other things, what do we know from the research, and again, I think from all of our practice, experience in these incidents, what do folks need who've been directly involved or their families have been directly involved? I think they need 4 things. They need your presence, they need you to focus on them. They need you to be human, they need you to be there, to be kind. They need you to prepare. If you're in a situation where you have to make a really difficult phone call, they actually need you to prepare for that phone call, because that phone call is all about them, not about you. And that's a really difficult situation, whether you're in the field with someone and you're having to make that call, or whether you're the boss, for example, and you're in the office. They also need access. They need, there's going to be, this thing is going to take time. So they need to be able to have easy access to you. So that might be, for example, in my work, we often talk about make sure you have a phone just for the family, a number just for the family to contact you, so that your phone is not taken up and they can get through to you directly. Whether that's a friend, a colleague, or whoever it is, they need to be able to have access. And they also need information. They talk about in a crisis, the number one need, information. People, they may not need it right away, they may not ask for it right away, but usually we as humans, we want to know what happened, we want to know why, we want to try and understand. And so that might be, for example, for some folks, we work with a lot of programs, for example, who wouldn't have a clue what a glacier is, wouldn't know what mountaineering is. And so that might mean getting them to the site, it might mean, explaining pictures, etc. All those things are really helpful in the aftermath to help the immediate family and loved ones make sense and start to understand what happened. And so, they really need honest, they need a human. They need people who really care. And I think as Deb's, really said, we can't wing that, because at the time our brain's going to be screaming, our amygdala's going to be, on fire. And so if we're trying to make it up at that point, we will have a fear-based response. That's why you see, there's a great saying that says, no matter whether, really bad news has been communicated well or poorly, it will always be remembered. I think that's really strong and really powerful, that it's within us to make sure that we can do that as well as possible in the hour of most need of folks who need to hear it, unfortunately. And then I think, if we think about that in relation to the primary victims, their loved ones, those folks who've been directly involved, then what we're also focusing on a lot more, thankfully, in our sort of context, we're focusing on us, on many people here who spend a living and a lifetime out in the field. Or if you're the CEO or if you're the manager, for example, if it's an organizational context, those people, what we know now is that those people really need help. And so they've become, the research in healthcare is really where this comes from. And those are basically known as second victims. So these are practitioners, or in healthcare, doctors, nurses, other healthcare practitioners who've been involved in a serious or fatal incident and have become impacted by it, who suffered significant impacts by it, whether those are psychological, physical, emotional, otherwise. And so, I've been doing this for a long time, I'm maybe the youngest on the crowd, and so that means that a lot of these folks up here have been doing it for a long time. When I first started out, we really didn't have a lot of help. I can remember being 22 years old and having someone come in after to give us debriefing after the incident I shared. And I can remember there was these two ladies, and they said to us, there was about 5 of us in the room, and they said, now why were you out there in the first place? It was just not the right, they didn't understand what we were doing. And I can remember it clearly, as a 22-year-old, I was pretty, full of myself. I was stunned, as Deb said. And I just got up and walked out and went, I can't handle this. I felt so judged, I felt blamed, I felt like, why are these people in the room? And so that really leads to, we did a big study about a year ago. We found that we asked a lot of people, actually there was quite a few folks from Alaska who contributed to the study. Deb's a co-author. And that study really looked at what is it that the second victims in the outdoors, what is it that what are the impacts that these major incidents can have on them? And we found really a few key things. We found that the most commonly experienced impacts of serious and fatal incidents, number one, hypervigilance. So this, and Roman, you spoke to it perfectly, you didn't give it that name, but your response to the tragedy and what happened to your son, and around that was really reflective of hypervigilance. I go out and everything's kind of start closing in. I'm looking for risk, I'm looking for danger. And what's interesting about that is, that's the most common response. That also correlates with healthcare. So in healthcare, same thing. What does that mean? It means that the next time we might go out in the backcountry or take a group out or do it ourselves, we can become increasingly defensive. So our practices can get more defensive and, interestingly, in some cases more risky, because we're not aware of our sort of situational awareness and how things change. The other thing that we found is that the anger, guilt, and frustration, that was the second big thing that came up. Folks, like us who've been involved in these incidents, that's a really common response. The one I wanted to touch on too was relationships. Personal relationships can get really hammered in many cases by experiencing, if you're going out and your loved one's at home and you're a practitioner in the outdoors, or you're going out and you experience a serious incident, oftentimes it has a significant negative, what we heard in the study was a negative impact on relationships. Funnily enough, where it was positive was where the other partner, and the other partner could understand what happened, could understand the work or the situation that you might have been in. So there's some protective things around there that we can consider. But again, none of this stuff is really talked about very often in our field, and it's so important. So what can we do about it to sort of pull us all together? We know that this is a significant issue. What the research shows, and through all of us informally talking, informal peer support, right there, number one. So if I want to be able to feel like I can get, my peer support, any of these people on the screen that I'm looking at, for example, if I experience a serious or fatal incident, I feel that I can call them up and have a conversation. Equally, I feel really supported that they would call me and check in. That's been shown to be the most important thing from folks who understand it and who won't judge. The second, access to professional support, whether that's counseling, psychological support, etc. But again, there's a qualifier there. It's got to be from, not people who are assuming that they know what happened. When you go back in the field, this one often comes up. How do I get, and Roman, you brought this up, how do I go back out there again? Oftentimes folks in the field talk about, well, I just won't go out. I couldn't go camping for 3 years in an incident a fatal incident I'd been involved in when I got as a risk manager. Every time I hear the wind, it would just freak me out for 3 years. And so, but again, if we think about those experiences, what we've also heard is when we go back into the field, having a buddy or having someone with us who perhaps can take the cognitive or the risk load off of us so that we can put our tiptoes back in and get in there safely, slowly with that support. So those are the sort of, some of the key things. Interestingly, the big takeaway from me was that when we heard we had about 300 respondents for this study around the world, they could tell us all these things that were really helpful or that could be really helpful for them and the experiences, but yet 64% of them coped on their own. So just think about that for a second. We know it works. We know it helps, but most of us don't feel like we can reach out for that. And so being courageous, picking up the phone, going for a coffee, being there when you hear about a serious or fatal incident that happens in the outdoors, and being, really realizing that actually these folks who are involved, whether they were in the field or whether they took a call in the office or whatever relevance, whatever connection they have, that it can be, it's an important thing to do to care for our own. Roman, I might hand back to you or anybody else who might want to sort of, back that up a little
So
bit.
Claire, I'm going to throw one more thing out to add on.
Yeah.
And that was the importance, same study, and you kind of mentioned it, but I want to make sure everybody gets what I'm saying, is the importance to talk about it. Not everybody needs that, but that was a really common phenomena, and I have that too, is that you just want to talk about it. Now we're going to psychology, there's actually something about when you say it out loud and you hear yourself say it, that seems to help stabilize it in the brain. It helps us, right? So many people were afraid, like, oh, I don't want to hear about it. That will bother you. So you're afraid to let them talk. And what I'm saying is, no, you guys. If you can, especially if you're a good listener and you can relate and not be judgmental, like, let them talk. Hey, do you need to talk about that? I'm here, right? And I always thrown that out. And I can't tell you how many people take me up on it, right? Because they need to talk and let them. But I mean, that was something that happened with me, like with Ptarmigan. It's like nobody would talk to me because they were ashamed for me. You didn't know what to say, so you turned around and walked the other way. And I'm like, oh boy, that's lonely, right? Like, reach out to these folks. They need to talk. Like, help them out here. Okay, now I'll turn it over.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, Claire. That was incredible. I think it's really valuable to hear from all of our panelists. I think most of us know Luke's sort of approach now, and that and Joe's prevented Deb what to do in the moment, and I think those are pretty familiar. We've been thinking about those sorts of things for a long time, but to hear from you, Claire, this sort of what happens after and what happens to those who witness rather than directly participate or are affected, I think that's really valuable. I think, speaking from my own experience, when I was young, we didn't have this sort of training available. I don't think we really had the knowledge yet that was articulated. I think it's super valuable to have this training available now, and especially the hands-on scenario training. That's the best. But, do you think we have time for questions? Do you guys have some other final comments you want to make, or how do you want to close this out?
I think we talked about trying to provide some, like, where could you go next on this learning journey ideas.
Yeah, sure. Pose those.
There aren't a lot. I feel like, what Joe and I do is we trade our book recommendations back and forth, and there are a lot of good books, and quite honestly, at the top of that list is Deb's Lessons Learned 2. Just go straight to the second one, that's the good stuff. I have a little lending library. I haven't told you this. Whenever I see them come up used, I buy them, so I've got like 8 of them. If anybody's near Airport Heights and wants one. But I think, I feel like there aren't places, like Knowles offers a risk management course online, but it's really targeted at business owners. I have a course in February that's a little more, it's kind of like my effort to try to have these conversations with my community of people that like playing outside. But I feel like mostly I'm reading, and I'm looking for mentors and having these conversations at dinner parties. What else? What are the other resources?
One thing I think about often is just being curious, and I'm not sure if that's something you can learn to be curious, but my parents were intensely curious people, and so I just grew up in that environment. They just kind of curious about everything, and it's kind of made this outdoor world. There's it's infinite how much you can learn out there and find out, and being curious, especially about these. I love the avalanche problem, because that's there's so much that you can't see, and it gets really into the psychology to avoid avalanches, so it keeps me intensely curious. But what do you think you can learn to be curious? That's a question I've wondered often.
Well, actually, I'll bet you can. And I could go off on a spiel of how the brain works. But curiosity is usually developed in childhood, right? Like we do have curious brain cells, and if those are stimulated as a child, and that's critical thinking, right? If we're stimulated to present critical thinking problems to children, they develop that skill set much better and can then use it later in life. But if you do not develop any type of curiosity as a child, you're less apt to have it as an adult.
What if you're a childish adult?
I have no problem with that.
Yeah, and I guess for me, this is where we're at the point of there's no magic wand, right? I just kind of go back to really what I said is, kind of what you talked about is the brain really works on data sets, right? And so the limbic system, that's one data set. But the prefrontal cortex, practice matters, right? That's one thing about kids, like you said last night, is a lot of times in today's society, we want the end result without the work. And that just doesn't work in the outdoor world. You have to put in the time. And it might be bidding in your backyard in weather like this. This is a perfect low-risk opportunity to learn how to biddy with very little equipment, right? Take out newspapers and a garbage bag and camp tonight. Don't use a tent, don't use a sleeping bag, and you're gonna figure out that you can do it. And then you'll have that skill set so that when the coffee hits the fan, you can use that skill set. So it's you can practice a lot of this without going through these expensive classes, but you gotta collect the data, and then you can read about whether or not you did it right. That's it.
Add to that, it's just this, people want things to advance rapidly, instantly. But this building experience and data, it's slow. It's just you gotta build it really slowly. And but that's the beauty of the outdoors. It's just being out there. It's really fun. So the slower you go, the more time you have out there, the more you can enjoy it and live a whole, huge, long, 100-year-long life out there doing it.
And then when you live to be as old as we are, you want to get the wisdom back, right?
Okay, great. What time is it? We have some time. We could probably take we got, let's go. We have to be out here at 8. There's somebody in the back. Yeah.
If we didn't get closure on your, how your amygdala responded to bear.
Oh, did I not finish that story? I've done that before. So he said, we didn't finish the bear story. What happened? The amygdala. So I'll try to make it quite quick. The bear did make contact, right? But we had been through many, many bear trainings, and so we did the right thing. We didn't run, we didn't scream, we didn't attack, we didn't jump on its back. But it was very intense. Just a little bit of a tidbit, because most people like this story. Anecdotal data is that most bears are left-handed. And this is because my partner got hit with left-handed on the right side of the head and ripped out his face. And the surgeon who repaired it said that all of the bear attacks they've done were left-handed bear attacks. And Alaska natives historically have said they believe most bear attacks are left-handed. So anyway, I say if he had juked us at a jive, you know, probably wouldn't have been hit. But when she penetrated, I say, well, really hard head. So one claw just basically ripped open the scalp. One broke the zygomatic. One ripped off the cheek. But basically, this part of the face was destroyed. And she's on him. I had to break the focus. So I mean, this is where you gotta think really quickly. I had a checklist. And I said, pick up a stick and whack her. Didn't see a stick. And then I took my hand and I put it in a bad choice. And so I just clapped really loudly. Went, hey, 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 hey! And it worked. And she spun around and faced me, and I'm like, ooh, sorry, you're good. And then basically came after me, and I dropped, right? Like that's what you're supposed to do. If contact is imminent, you drop and play dead. So this one's dead, I'm dead. The bear like just looks at us, breathes on us. The threat is gone. The bear splits, runs on the trail. And I turned and said, are you okay? And the first response was, where's the bear? And as a medical person, I have a medical background, perfect answer. No altered mental status, no loss of memory, no amnesia to the event. Like, his brain's fine, never penetrated, it's not gonna bleed to death, no facial injury, he can breathe, this is a little deal, buddy, right? Let's get up and go. That bear can come back. So we actually got up, walked away, like that's what you wanna do, get away from the dangerous situation, and then evaluated the situation. And then the power of the adrenaline is, there was literally no pain. This became almost like laughing jokes. Well, at least I can see if she's coming, things like that. So like, that the power of adrenaline can get us through survival situations. Okay.
Okay, I think we're going to have to end it there. That's those are great questions and great answers, and we've got like 4 minutes to dash out of here. Okay.